Thank you, everybody, for coming. So, to get going, let me put a timer so I don't get behind on what I'm talking about. Essentially, where this talk kind of has started and has come about is that everybody's using prompts, right? But really, what is prompting? It means you got to think about it. Who here has heard the term code switching, right? Talking to AIs is just a new code switching, right? You've heard of, send this email professional language, right? There now needs to be a new language of talking to AIs. And it's not just going to be deploying an agent. It is the same kind of language and the same principles apply to how you talk to your terminal buddy every day, how you're going to talk to your tech support, the little chat when you get in there, right? And that's one of the things, like what I want to talk about here kind of applies to that. And wanted to break it down into an engineering look at it, right? Break down what the parts are and in there so you can understand them and be able to, when you're reading through it, understand what's going on, what is missing, and what should be in there to help make your everyday work in there, right? So we're going to break it down to architecture. What are the parts called? What are some things that you can use to improve in there? How to use AI to help you? And then if we don't run out of time, we're going to get into some of the more advanced techniques with prompt engineering. So to get going, the parts. Everything in AI, no matter how crazy or how much stuff it gets, it just boils down to you have your system messages and your user messages, right? System messages means everything that is behind the scenes, the things that you normally don't see in a user interface. Whether you're using ChatGPT, Claude, or even Claude Code, any harness that you're using, there's a lot of stuff behind it that sets it how you're creating it. If you are creating your own endpoint, you're doing this. This is how you're defining it. This is the stuff that carries on through every conversation, right? This setup. Everything else is in the user message. That's part of the conversation. That's what goes back and forth. This is the rest of the things. All your prompts should have an instruction where you're telling it what you want it to do. Then you have context. I've here we've heard the term context engineering. That just means is all the other stuff that goes into it for making a decision. We got to remember that as advanced as all these LLMs are getting, they are still just a really good autocomplete, right? They are just going to be from everything that you send it, they're going to tell you the most likely thing to keep that conversation going. It hasn't gotten more complicated than that. It may do a lot of stuff in between in there and doing some thinking and jumps in between, but the input and output are still the same thing. They're not more complicated. And it's really good at pattern recognition. So examples, whenever you give it examples of what is good and what is bad, you will get better answers. And same thing, delimiters. That kind of goes into the next thing. You need to know Markdown. I know with this audience, it's probably not as much of an ask with less technical people if they're going back. Markdown, because what? All of these machines, all these LLMs just take a string of text and put it in a single line. So Markdown lets you give it some structure, lets you give you, same thing, it's adding context, it's not understanding from just text. It is very simple, it's kind of become the default. Everything going in and out of it, Markdown will make it better. So if you're coming somebody and they're coming about prompting, they're talking about something, you need to be thinking Markdown at least, right? That is where you're writing everything in. And if they don't know Markdown, that should be the first place you need to go. Now, for the rest of the presentation, to make it easier to understand what I'm talking about, I'm just going to kind of follow through an example, right? How many of you have wanted to write a postmortem on stuff like that, right? It's one of the things we're using it. Figure be an example that resonates. And you just think, write a postmortem, and you're going to get really bad responses from that. Or this is going to be what you call hallucinations. It just means like me as a human, I know the context, I know what it should be in there, and why can't it understand what I'm saying without me telling anything more? All these LLMs, all these things really work as a junior person, right? Really smart person, as soon as they come into work, they may know everything book knowledge, but they don't know how your company works. They don't know how you work. So prompts and all this is about, in the context, it's about you explaining it how your business works and what words, what it means in the language in your business. And it's not necessarily wrong, it's just wrong in the context of your business of what you're wanting to get out of it. So, foundational. the zero shot, right? This is most of the things that we're doing. We're just sending a message and we want a response back. We're not giving anything else. It can be for simple things. It can be pretty easy, like change this text up there. That's where we're going. Now is when you start getting to the one shot, right? This is where you're in that message. You are giving examples. You're giving me like, hey, when I mean this, I'm looking for a response to, with this type of answer, right? Starts getting into it. Then you get into few shot. And I'm going through here because this is just the terms of what these are called, and how all these LLMs understand what these are called. Few shot is when you give it a couple of examples for different situations, or you give it a bad example. Sometimes for these models, a bad example is more helpful than a good example because it helps us stop going into the wrong ways, right? Being like, I've gotten this before. This is not what I want. This is not the response. And that helps us steer into new ways that you were not expecting it. And then the final one, the one that we heard so many times, the role-based, right? Ask as a senior SRE, act as this. Now, that is really powerful because those words or that role has a lot of assumptions, right? How people expect to act, the way they're thinking. There was a really good blog post from Anthropic that because all these models were trained mostly on literature, you got to think about them as character sheets, right? They're playing a character. They're autofilling how a character would respond. So when you're telling it, like, act as a developer, they have been, based on everything they're reading, they've been trained on an idea of what a developer is. And what does that mean? How would a developer act, right? So like an angry developer or this, you get better code review, right? A frustrated senior developer, you're going to get a lot more snappy and, and begrudging code reviews, that sort of thing. So now the problem with this is that your company's title for SRE or for this may be different than what it knows what to do. So while it can be very powerful, it can also lead to ignoring some rules because, God damn it, I'm an SRE and I know better, right? You've met the people like, I don't need to follow the instructions. I'm an SRE. This is what I do, right? It's literally that. It is no more than like you were talking to a person and you have to define that. So while it is powerful, it gets you a lot of the way there. Then you just have to make sure you're understanding from, that user testing, but coming in and out, that you catch those assumptions that are not lined up with what you want to do. And then you just add that more to the prompts of what you were talking about. Now, the first technique in this one, clarity and specificity, right? This is the biggest thing that needs to be in there, right? Being specific in what you're wanting it to do, the tone, the examples, what you want the response, being as specific as you can as possible will do more than any other kind of crazy technique, right? AI and all these LLMs are really good at parsing through messy data. So while your context can help, sometimes just giving it the specificity in there. And I just added a couple of things for these models. They can be, kind of how they all worked and some of the things that each model kind of tweaks around of how they behave better. Now, I'll have a link for my slides, or they can go on my website if you want a copy of my slides in there later, so if you want to jump into it. But, for example, Opus just be like, hey, avoid the complexity. Like, tell me what you want in that first sentence, right? It should be in there. For Gemini, the Gemini 3.1, you want your role, goal, constraints, and example, and then your output, right? If you phrase your prompt in that way, it will do a much better job of kind of getting exactly what you want out of it. You're giving it that clarity of the things that is in there. Second thing, chain of thought. I know it sounds intimidating. I know that for me, when I first heard about it, all it really means is that in your prompt, you are specifying the way that you would break down a problem, right? That is nothing more complicated than that. It's not in there just saying like, hey, if I am doing this incident, I want you to first do this, then look at this, then do this next thing. Like how you would break down the problem. Your SOPs are your chain of thought, right? How you would address a problem, like all these things. That is the chain of thought. It's telling them how you as a person, you that have the experience in there, would approach a problem so that it can get that answer, right? It's not more complicated than that. Now, a little trick and something that's in there is that if you're wanting to understand how it did things or how it came to it, it's changed a little from Claude 4.6 to 4.7, but you can use Claude does well if you mark things out with XML tags, right? If you're telling it like this is a little context or this is some incident data just around some XML tags, it helps it parse the information. But you can also be like, hey, just when your response, mark this, where's your reasoning, where's your thing, same thing. You're giving some specificity of how you want that answer, how you wanted things. And it helps you sort of understand how it came to the solution, how it came to it, especially if you're giving it more of the reasoning task in there. Same thing. Next thing is the format constraints, right? We talked about how Markdown by formatting gives it a lot of context, but it can also be really helpful in stopping it that like verbose and the languages get florid and things like that. You can tell it as part of your prompt what you want out of the response. You know, I need a summary. I need a timeline. I need it to be this. I need the root cause, right? This is how I'm expecting it. I want it to be formatted in this way. As a sort of extra step to that, JSON is fantastic for doing this, right? This also helps for in there, but even if it's just your prompt, with JSON, it's a lot of information on the way to set up, right? You're giving it the name of the fields, but you're also giving it the response you expect. You know, I expect this to be a 7.1, 7.2. I expect strings, and that's the thing. It doesn't have to be properly formatted JSON, right? These in the right side can be almost your extra prompt. Like the service, I want these three things. I want a two sentence answer here. But because you're creating this relationship, it's understanding it. And it's almost like if a human see it and would get that meaning, most LLMs will benefit from it, right? It's not always a perfect thing, but it will take you a lot further and it will help you kind of break down things, right? If something that you expect that will have a timeline and break it down, it can give it into that. It can give you the information that you need. So play around with it. It can be really helpful for those things. And same thing, if you later want to have this as an agent solution where you then just pass it off to a system or something else that can take it and put it into another format, it works really well for that, right? You get a really good and consistent response by just telling it like, I want my response as this, right? Saves a lot of that parsing. Now, last thing is just called prompt compression, right? You have your tokens. You can start off with a really complex prompt, but you need this to run more real time. You need to be in there. You can compress the same prompt and keep usually the most of the quality, right? You will lose some of the nuances, and this is where you kind of have to start balance to see how much you can compress it. But when you're looking at those token counts of in and out, and you go to volume, that's what that technique is. Now, the great thing, and this is, there we go. From here, just kind of want to go through an example of how you would build each step into creating like a good final prompt, right? Like we started, write a pro-smart. That's in there. It's not really going to get you this. First, you put in a role, right? Like write a senior SRE, write a best per month for this cost. Then you start adding specificity, right? Your team, this is analyze the incident for this one. This is the incident. This is what affected. This is what I'm trying to do. I need to get out the timeline and deployment history. Then from the previous layers, you would add on, this is how I would analyze it, right? This is what I want. When I say analyze it, this is what I mean. I mean you to reconstruct the timeline first, then identify the root cause, like each of these steps. And then you add the format constraints. This is how I want you to get the response out to me, right? I don't want you to write a 4 or 5 page, paper. I want the response as this because I want it to be actionable. I want that response. And then, of course, in the same prompt, you can have validation, right? You can have it be what it means to validation. Like before writing, check all time steps to this. The root cause is technical, not a person, it goes into it, but this is just out of the example. Like when a lot of these people, when you hear like validation in this, a lot of it is just part of the prompt that goes in there, right? And that's the thing, is the way you talk to it, when you do commands, when you write skills, when you write agents, they're more or less the same prompt that goes all over thing, right? They're just how they get called, but it's essentially all boils down to they're still all calling the same API, and they're still all just getting you that same text in, text out response. And that's one of the things that with this LLM is so different from anything else that we've done in engineering. But it doesn't change, right? You can either pay for tokens for it to try to think, and then you get those like not the responses you're expecting it, or we as developers, engineers, we have the domain knowledge. We know how problems should be solved. We can tell it exactly how the problems should be solved, and then we get those responses faster and more consistently, right? It is engineering more or less. It might not be always like one-to-one like we're used to it, but it doesn't go in there. Now this is the fun part. You don't need to be great at writing prompts. AI is really good at writing prompts for their model. Now you need to know what you're asking it for, right? And that's kind of what we went to the beginning part. These techniques, the few shot, the learning, the role, all of these things have names, and that's what is coming there. It can be something as you can have a GPT that goes in there, or a project that you can have that always goes in there, right? And you can have it be critique the prompt, in 10 specificity in there. You can have it and then put your prompt and start from there, have a conversation, and come out with a really complex prompt like we talked about this, right? It helps in there in the same way from the compression. Like I had this and then I just had to be like, hey, I need to compress this one. It came out with a lean version of it. This will do mostly the same thing. It won't, it'll be a little faster, shorter, but as we can see, it's still kind of doing the same thing, it's touching on the same items, but it's a much faster prompt, right? You're going to get less of the nitty gritty and less of details, but you have different reasons when you wanted to use it. And that's sort of, as an engineer, you just need to understand when things are appropriate. The same that it's always been, right? What are the trade-offs? That's what we all do with everything in our work days, right? What are our trade-offs? So from here, in your mindset, I'm challenging you to go here, structure, be sophistication, right? You don't need crazy words. You don't need to tie in a lot of, out of the systems. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Just look at the prompts that you're using, look at the commands, the skills, and make sure that they have a clean structure. They're easy for a person to understand. If you're reading them and you're getting lost, an LLM is going to get lost, right? That's a gut check is something in there. As you work more with it, you're going to get a gut check of what things work with the models that you're using. Measure what matters, and build prompt templates. And any prompt that you've been using or any command, just run it through your model. You may have written it like 6 months ago, but the new model, 4.7 just came out. Just have it run through it and be like, hey, check this prompt again. You're a prompt engineer, like check this prompt again, and it'll help fix it into what it works for this model, right? You may have a little bit of tweaks to it, while the same prompt will work across almost all the models, more or less the same. If you want that last mile, that last polish for it, just have it run on the model that you're expecting to use it on, and see how it tweaks it, how it reorganizes it. And if you want, I do have, this is a repo that I have kind of open of some prompts that I kind of been using. Just take a look, and if you have some that are working for you, some commands, please share them back, add them to them. I'm trying to just build up a library of prompts that can be reused, right? I have some things for documentation, for cleaning up your Claude MD file, your agents file, how to set up your projects from there. So in there. Now we still got 10 more minutes so I can get into the advanced pattern. This is a link to the slides. If anybody wants to, I'll give it a second. Now here getting to some of the more advanced patterns, some of the more, when you're trying to take it in there, this is more when you're starting to get to agent work. You're trying to get to those flows that we've heard so many people talks about, right? These are the techniques that would come into those prompts. Are we good? I'm seeing still a couple of slides, making sure everybody got it. Yep. Anybody else, or we're good? Awesome. Tree of thought, right? This is the big brother to chain of thought. Now, what this is really good when you are wanting to have it explore different paths at the same time, right? For these, it works really great for this problem, right? You have the incident, and you may have multiple ways that you would have tagged this problem. You would have had it look at the code deploy, look at the infrastructure, look at the processes. So you almost have multiple chains of thought looking at it because you may not know where the problem came from, right? So you're giving it almost 3 different thoughts, and some of the now bigger thinking models are really good at running this. When you run, if you remember that, like the pro models are essentially doing this, like ChatGPT Pro, was it O1 or something? That was taking like 3 days to do it. All they're doing is they're writing these prompts from what you give it to and then running this 100 times, right? Running different tree of thoughts. They're just writing these prompts and running it. When it's thinking, it is literally just writing these prompts in the background and then it's executing those prompts on the same model. So, and then when you complete it, you have it compare each other. So same thing. If you're going to put this on an agent that will, when the incident happens, that'll take a look at all the logs, and you want to look at it from different perspectives or pull from different sources. This is how you would write a prompt that could do that, right? It can investigate different things and then compare the results and look at it, right? Next one is self-consistency. This is when you need that response to be accurate, right? To prevent hallucinations. But that is the most important thing when you write a prompt, right? Like you may have look at the API gateway incident. In a way of tree of thought, a little bit of that, but you look at you run multiple analysis and then you compare the conclusions, right? This is that validation step that we mentioned up earlier, right? Hey, compare all the root causes that each one identified. If they all match, then you have confidence. If only 2 or 3 mentioned in there, right? Like you're having it to compare the responses and give you those things, and then final root cause. So it is in there. It is that validation that you're under, the self-consistency. So this works really well when you're having it. We're using this a lot when we wanted to look at sales data, right? We wanted to look at different things or what could be causing it. And then we want to make sure that response is consistent and is valid. We have it look at it from different ways, different values, and then just have it to compare. And like with any other, high system, I think we were talking to somebody about like Artemis, right? They have 3 systems that compare against each other, and if they don't agree, then that is that check. It's the same thing. It's pure engineering principles that we've used before with deterministic systems kind of applies to this. And then the final one, the react pattern. This is probably one of the most powerful ones because this is when we know that we have tool usage, right? When we wanted to loop over and keep doing that thinking, is the recent act and observe pattern. So this works really well when you're deploying it on an agent, on a platform, or when you're writing a skill, right? Like if you're writing a skill, this is where you're telling it like, hey, these are the tools that you're going to pull for. This is the locations that you're going to be pulling from this information. And this is how I want you to approach the problem, right? This is what I'm trying to solve, but I want you to think about it, create a hypothesis, do what, find out what tool from the tools that you have, go get the data. And then when you respond, look at the responses and iterate. And then do you need to, if you're don't have enough, go back through the loop and do this again, right? This can really help you. But what's really powerful is that whatever problem you have, if you have another prompt and you just ask it to be like, hey, rewrite this in the React pattern. Or if you have a skill that you're using for work, for like looking through your logs or things like that, I challenge you to just go back and ask Claude Code or Codex to be like, hey, I want you to just rewrite this skill following the React pattern, and you'll see like how much of a benefit. This works really well when you're trying to like dig through information, have it go through it and go through multiple loops of in there. Sometimes it's good to just be like, hey, only do this 5 times max. If you can't find the answer in like 5 turns, otherwise it can just be sticking on there and burning tokens. But it's really good because it's really good at creating hypotheses. We're getting different options, and you can get a lot of thinking from this. So mixing all of these patterns in there will definitely help you make sure you have more consistency in your workflows are better, right? Even the day-to-day. When you're doing your plan, when you're doing your plans of working and creating this, just having it be like, hey, solve this problem, but let's take a tree of thought approach, or let's take a chain of thought approach. Like write down exactly how you're going to break down this problem, and it's in there. So just knowing what they're called, like understanding the names of the concepts will help you a lot more in getting it to write those better prompts for you and improve your usage. And honestly, stop a lot of the tokens, because Claude Code, all this stuff, if you ever look at the logs, what they're doing, like when you give it a very simple prompt, what it's doing, it is rewriting what you ask it until it gets it into a good prompt like this, so that then it can do the work. But what happens there when you get a lot of the deviation or the hallucinations is that the assumptions that it has from what you gave it to are not the way that you would solve the problem. Like you're an engineer, you know how you would tackle a problem, you know where you need to look into. Well, no, I'm fixing this bug. I'm fixing this solution. I know I need to look at these 3 files as a starting point and do it. So the more you give it that information, you give it that context, and you tell like, this is how I want you to solve it, the less is going to spend time thinking for yourself and giving a generic answer to solve your problem, right? And that's when they're either you're paying for it with like having a little thinking yourself, or you're just having it burn tokens in trying to recreate what you know how you would solve it. So that's it. Yeah, if anybody has any questions.
I think we got time for 1 or 2 questions. I see one in the back. Yeah, come meet me in the middle.
When you had your notes on like model specific, like variation, how did you come up with those? Is that from experience? Or are you reading like release notes for models or community feedback?
It is a lot of sorry, what is it? Same thing, from some feedback from things that I've seen in the forums come in there, and a lot of them actually I just kind of asked each of the models, right? That's the thing, like in there being like, hey, I have this prompt how would you make it work better for you, right? Treating this for you, and then give me some tips. So I have a ChatGPT product that goes in each one, because I've given this talk a couple of times, so I just updated it. But in there, and also just doing a search. That's one of the things that, from what I have said here, it is my understandings in there. All of these models are a black box, right? Everybody is throwing everything at the wall, and this is what has been sticking to the wall for now, right? So it is sort of our best understanding of best practices, and it can change. And in a way, this is in a way generic, but it can help in there. And so far from the past year since I've kind of taken this approach and started this initial talk, this is sort of what has stuck, right? The individual advice may change, but just keeping that basics and just having it clean. And to me, it's almost like if a human can't read it, then an LLM is going to get lost in it, right? That is, it doesn't get more complicated than that. So the more clear you're able to write, the more in there. The best thing is that I'm a horrible writer, which I went to tech school because I didn't want to do writing. But now it's in there. So just having the LLMs are really good at writing the prompts for themselves. So just knowing that I want you to clean this. I want you to be specificity. I want you to, think of the structure. And they can do that work for you. And then when you read it and something doesn't feel right, then you know how to fix it. You don't have to worry about the details, and you can iterate faster on that.
Hey, so at my company, we're trying to use agents to tackle tickets directly. So I wanted to ask if you've used these techniques for writing tickets or how you're approaching writing tickets now that we have like AI agents to tackle them.
Yeah, definitely. So where we are right now, it's things like, and what I kind of laid out in the company, what we're trying to do is like, it should be like, first of all, to make sure that it works, you should have it as a skill in your code agent, right? Like the putting it in a pipeline, putting it in a server, that's almost the last step. That's the deployment step, right? Once you figure out, but first you need to know, if I was to run this on my machine as a skill, if I should just do like slash, create ticket, and then that line or that input that you would expect to get it on that timeline. If it can do that consistently, then you're literally taking that same prompt and just putting it on a deployment pipeline, right? And from that point, you know what information it would need to pull from to know what you connect it to, right? Otherwise, we get stuck in the same things of like, oh, I have this, this really good pipeline or this vendor and things like that. And you spend time trying to do the connectors, trying to do all this stuff, but you may not need them, when we can all run them locally. And once it is running, you literally just copy and paste into the deployment pipeline, and you know exactly what you need to get this work done. And we have been doing, we're having a pilot of PDLC that'll take it all the way from idea, all the steps. And they're just different agents that are very specific on each role to do that. So this is a really good, requirement gatherer, right? And then it passes it off to another one that is your product, acts as a product owner, then an engineering lead and things like that. And then you check at each of the steps. We still need a human to make sure in there, because they can go and they all sound really good, but it may have made some wrong assumption in the pipeline. It just keeps adding up to it, right? You don't want to get to your 1,000-line code commit from that assumption if you made, if they made a wrong assumption in the first part, right? In that first require gather. So I hope it helps.
So this is great. Thank you, Martin. Let's hear it for Martin.
Thank you.